Hello and welcome to the Data Engineering Podcast, the show about modern data management. When you're ready to build your next pipeline or want to test out the projects you hear about on the show, you'll need somewhere to deploy it, so check out our friends over at Linode. With 200 gigabit private networking, scalable shared block storage, and a 40 gigabit public network, you've got everything you need to run a fast, reliable, and bulletproof data platform. If you need global distribution, they've got that covered too, with worldwide data centers, including new ones in Toronto and Mumbai. And for your machine learning workloads, they just announced dedicated CPU instances. Go to dataengineeringpodcast.com/Linode, that's Linode today, to get a $20 credit and launch a new server in under a minute. And don't forget to thank them for their continued support of this show. And listen, I'm sure you work for a data-driven company. Who doesn't these days? Does your company use Amazon Redshift? Have you ever groaned over slow queries, or are just afraid that Amazon Redshift is going to fall over at some point? Well, you've got to talk to the folks over at Intermix.io. They have built the missing Amazon Redshift console. It's an amazing analytics product for data engineers to find and rewrite slow queries, and it gives actionable recommendations to optimize data pipelines. WeWork, Postmates, and Medium are just a few of their customers. Go to dataengineeringpodcast.com/intermix today and use promo code DEP at signup to get a $50 discount. And you listen to this show to learn and stay up to date with what's happening in databases, streaming platforms, big data, and everything else you need to know about modern data management. For even more opportunities to meet, listen, and learn from your peers, you don't want to miss out on this year's conference season. We have partnered with organizations such as O'Reilly Media, Dataversity, Corinium Global Intelligence, and Data Council. Upcoming events include the O'Reilly AI Conference, the Strata Data Conference, the combined events of the Data Architecture Summit and Graph Forum, and Data Council in Barcelona. Go to dataengineeringpodcast.com/conferences to learn more about these and other events and take advantage of our partner discounts to save money when you register today. Your host is Tobias Macy, and today I'm interviewing Pete Soderling about his work to build and grow a community for data professionals with the Data Council conferences and meetups, as well as his experiences as an investor in data-oriented companies. And full disclosure that Data Council and Clubhouse are both previous sponsors of the podcast, and Clubhouse is one of Pete's companies that he's invested in. So, Pete, can you just start by introducing yourself?
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to be here, Tobias. I'm Pete Soderling, as you mentioned, and I'm a serial entrepreneur. I'm also a software engineer from the first internet bubble, and I'm super passionate about making the world a better place for other developers.
And do you remember how you first got involved in the area of data management?
Yeah, I think, funnily enough, the thing that jumps out at me is how excited I was when I was an early developer, very young in my career. I discovered this book, Database Design for Mere Mortals, and I think I read it over my holiday vacation one year, and I was sort of amazed at myself at how interesting such a potentially dry topic could be. So that was an early indicator. I think fast forward, my first company, actually my second company in 2009 that I started was a company called Strata Security, and originally we were building what we thought was a API firewall for web-based APIs, but it quickly morphed into a platform that secured and offered premium data from providers like Bloomberg or Garmin or companies that had lots of interesting proprietary data sets. And our vision was to become essentially like the electricity meter in between that data provider and their API and the consumers who are consuming that data through their API, so that we could offer basically metered billing based on how much data was consumed. So I guess that was my first significant interest as an entrepreneur in the data space back about 10 years or so ago.
And now you have become an investor in data-oriented companies. You've also started the series of conferences that were previously known as the Data Eng Conf and have been rebranded as Data Council. And that all started with your work in founding Haka Labs as a community space for people working in the data engineering area. And I'm curious what your original reason was for focusing your efforts in that direction and focusing particularly on data engineers.
Yeah, I guess it's gets to the core a bit of who I am. And as I've looked back over my shoulder, as both an engineer and a founder, I guess what I've realized, which actually to some extent surprised me, is that all of the companies I've started have all had software engineers as end users or customers. And I discovered that I really am significantly passionate about getting developers together, helping them share knowledge, helping them with better tooling, and essentially just making the world awesome for them. And it's become a core mission of everything I do. And I think it basically is infused in all these different opportunities that I'm pursuing now. For instance, one of my goals is to help 1,000 engineers start companies. And that gets to some of the startup stuff, which is essentially a side project that we can talk about later. But specifically as it relates to Hackle Labs, Hackle Labs was originally started in 2010 to become a community for software engineers. And originally we thought that we were solving the engineer recruiting problem. So we had various ideas and products that we tested surrounding introducing engineers to companies in a trusted way. And originally that was largely for all software engineers everywhere. And our plan was to turn it into a digital platform. So it was going to have social network dynamics where we were connecting engineers together and those engineers would help each other find the best jobs. So that very much was sort of in the social networking world. But one of our marketing ideas was we wanted to build a series of events surrounding the digital platform so that we could essentially reach users from the community in our events and introduce them to the digital platform, which was the main goal. And one of the niche areas that we wanted to focus on was data, because data science was becoming a hot thing. Data engineering was even more nascent, but I sort of saw the writing on the wall and saw that data engineering was going to be required to support all the interesting data science goodness that was being talked about and really was of interest to business. And so, purely the data meetups that we started were essentially a marketing channel for this other startup that I was working on. And ultimately that startup didn't work and the product didn't succeed, which is often the case with network-based products, especially in the digital world. But I realized that we had built this brand surrounding awesome content for software engineers, data engineers through our meetups that we had started. And I fell back on that community and figured out that there must be another way to monetize and to keep the business going, because I was so passionate about working with engineers and continuing to build this community that we had seeded. And engineers loved the brand. They loved the events that we were running. They loved our commitment to deeply technical content. And so one thing led to another. And ultimately, those meetups grew into what Data Council is today.
And you mentioned that when you first began on this journey, it was in the 2010 timeframe. And as you referred to, data engineering as a discipline was not very widely recognized. And I'm wondering how you have seen the overall evolution of that role and responsibility, and what the state of the industry and what the types of recognition and responsibilities were for data engineers at that time.
Yeah, data engineering was just not really a thing at the time, and only the largest tech companies, Google and Facebook, even had the notion of sort of the data engineering concept. But I guess what I've learned from watching engineering at those companies is that because of their scale, they discover things more quickly and more often, or earlier than other folks tend to, and so I think that was just an interesting, leading indicator. And so I felt like it was going to get bigger and bigger. But yeah, I don't even know if Google necessarily had a data engineering job title at that time. So, that was just very early in the space. And I think we've seen it develop a lot since then. And it's not just in the title, but I think, we saw early on that data science was a thing and was going to be a bigger thing. Data engineering was required to tee up the data scientists and the quants to do awesome stuff in the first place. And then there's also the analysts who are trying to consume the data sets, oftentimes in slightly different ways than the data scientists. So I think early on we saw that these three types of roles were super fundamental and foundational to building the future of data infrastructure and business insights and data-driven products. And so even though we started off running the data engineering meetup, which I think we're still known for, we pretty quickly through the conference embraced these other two disciplines as well, because I think the interplay of how these types of people work together inside organizations is where the really interesting stuff is. And so, as these job descriptions, the themes in these job descriptions and sort of how they unite and how they work together on projects is fascinating. And so through Data Council, our goal has been to further the industry by getting these folks in the same room around content that they all care about. And sometimes it's teaching a data engineer a little bit more about data science because that's what makes them stronger and better able to operate on a multifunctional team. And sometimes it's the data scientists getting a little bit better at some of the engineering disciplines and understanding more what the data engineers have to go through. So I think that looking at this world in a cohesive way, especially across these three roles, has really benefited us and made the community event very unique and strong. And now I should say that I think the next phase of that in terms of team organization, and especially in terms of our vision with Data Council, is we're now embracing product managers into that group as well. I think that, there's this stack, we sort of see the stack of data being data infrastructure on the bottom, then data engineering and pipelines, then data science and algorithms, then data analytics on top of that. And finally, there's the AI features and the people that are weaponizing this entire stack into AI products and data-driven features. And I think the final icing on the cake, if you will, is creating space for data-oriented product managers because, it used to be that maybe you think of a data product manager as like working for Oracle or being in charge of shipping a database. But that's sort of a bit older school at this point. And there's all kinds of other interesting applications of data infrastructure and data technologies that are not directly in the database world, where real world product managers in the modern era sort of need to understand how to interact with this stack and then how to build data tooling, whether it's internal tooling for developers or customer consumer facing features. So I think embracing the product manager at the top of the stack has been super helpful for our community as well.
And I find it interesting that you are bringing in the product manager because there has long been a division in particularly with technical disciplines where you have historically the software engineer who is at odds with the systems administrator, and then recently the data scientist or data analyst who is at odds with the data engineer. But there has been an increasing alignment across the business case and less so in terms of the technical divisions. And I'm curious what your view is in terms of how the product manager fits in that overall shift in perspective and what their responsibility is within an organizational structure to help with the overall alignment in terms of requirements and vision and product goals between those different technical disciplines.
Yeah, well, hey, I think this is just a super. This question is a microcosm of what's really happening in the engineering world, because I think software engineers at the core, at the central location, are actually eating disciplines and roles that used to be sort of beneath them and above them. So again, I'm sort of thinking in terms of this vertical stack. But most modern tech companies don't have DBAs because the software engineer is now the DBA, and many companies don't have designated infrastructure teams because the software engineer is responsible for their own infrastructure. And some of that is because of cloud and other dynamics. But sort of what's happening is, at its core, the engineer is eating the world. And it's bigger than just software eating the world. The engineer is eating the world. And so I think the absorption of some of these older roles into what's now considered core software engineering has happened below. And I think it's happening above too. So I think some product management is collapsing into the world of the software engineer, or engineers are sort of laddering up into product management. And I think part of that is the nature of these deeply technical products that we're building. So I think many engineers make awesome product managers. Perhaps they have to step away and be willing not to write as much code anymore. But because they have an intrinsic understanding of the way these systems are built, I think engineers are just sort of like reaching and absorbing a lot of these other roles. And so some of the best product managers that I think we've seen have been ex-software engineers. So I just think that there's a real merging. This is just a larger perception that I have of the world into these software engineering related disciplines. And I think it's actually not a far leap to sort of see how, an engineer, a product manager who's informed with an engineering discipline is super effective in that role. So I just think this is a broader trend that we're seeing overall, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I definitely agree that there has been a much broader definition of what the responsibilities are for any given engineer because of the fact that there are a lot more abstractions for us to build off of. And so it empowers engineers to be able to actually have a much greater impact with a similar amount of actual effort because of the fact that they don't have to worry about everything from the silicon up to the presentation layer because there are so many different useful pre-built capabilities that they can take advantage of and think more in terms of the systems rather than the individual bits and bytes.
Yeah, exactly.
And in terms of your overall efforts for community building and community management, there are a number of different sort of focal points for communities to grow around that happen because of different shared interests or shared history. So there are programming language communities, there are communities focused on disciplines such as, front end development or product management or business. And I'm wondering what your experience has been in terms of how to orient a community focus along the axis of data, given that it can, in some ways, be fairly nebulous as to what are the common principles in data because there are so many different ways to come at it and so many different formats that data can take.
Yeah, I think the core, one of the core values for us, and I don't know if this is necessarily specific to data or not, but it's just openness. And I think especially, we see ourselves as much, much more than just a conference series. And we use the word community in our team and at our events, and just to describe what we're doing dozens and dozens of times a week. And so, yeah, I think the community bond and the mentality for our brand is super high. I think that there's also an open source sort of commitment. I think that's a mentality. I think that's a coding discipline and style. And I think that sharing knowledge is just super important in any of these technical fields. And so engineers are super thirsty for knowledge, and we see ourselves as being a connecting point where engineers and data scientists can come and share knowledge with each other. I think especially maybe that's a little bit accelerated in the case of data science or AI research because these things are changing so fast. And so there is a little bit of an accelerator in terms of the way that we're able to see our community grow and the interest in the space because so much of this technical stuff is changing quickly. And, engineers need a trusted source to come to where they can find and get surfaced the best, most interesting research and most interesting open source tools. So we've capitalized on that, and we try and be. And on one hand, we're sort of a media company. On the other hand, we're an events business. On the other hand, we're a community. But we're sort of putting all these three things together in a way that we think benefits careers for engineers, and it enables them to level up in their careers and make them smarter and get better jobs and meet awesome people. So really, all in all, we see ourselves as building this awesome talent community around data and AI worldwide, and we think we're in a super unique position to do that and succeed at it.
Community building can be fairly challenging because of the fact that you have so many different disparate experiences and opinions coming together. And sometimes it can work out great. Sometimes you can have issues that come up just due to natural tensions between people interacting in a similar space. And I'm wondering what you have been drawing on for inspiration and reference for how to foster and grow a healthy community, and any interesting or challenging or unexpected aspects of that overall experience of community management that you've encountered in the process.
Yeah, I think it's an awesome question because any company that embraces community to some degree embraces perhaps somewhat of a wild, wild west. And I think some companies and brands manage that very heavily top down, and they want to, and they have the resources to, and they're able to. Some others, I think, let the community sprawl. And, in our particular case, because we're a tiny startup, I used to say that we're three people and two PayPal accounts running events all over the world, even though we're just a touch bigger than that now, not much. But we have 18 meetups all over the world and 4 main conferences from San Francisco to Singapore. So I think the only way that we've been able to do that, and just to be clear, like we're a for-profit business, But I think that's one of the other things that makes us super unique is that, yes, we're for profit, but at the same time, we're embracing a highly principled notion of community, and we use lots and lots of volunteers in order to help further that message worldwide because we can't afford to hire community managers in every single city that we want to operate in. So that's one thing, and I guess for us, we've just had to embrace kind of the wild nature of what it means to scale a community worldwide and deal with the ups and downs and challenges that come with that. And of course, there's some brand risk, and there's other sorts of frustrations. Sometimes working with volunteers, but I guess my inspiration, specifically in this, was really through 500 startups. And I went on Geeks on a Plane back in 2012, I believe. And when I saw the way that 500 Startups, which is a startup accelerator in San Francisco, was building community all around the world, basically one plane at a time, and I saw how kind of wild and crazy that community was, I sort of learned like the opportunity and the challenge of building community that way. And I think the main thing, if you can embrace the chaos, and if your business situation forces you to embrace the chaos in order to scale, I think the main way that you keep that in line is you just have a few really big core values that you talk about and you emphasize a lot. Because basically, the community has to sort of manage itself against those values. And this isn't like a detailed, like heavy top-down process because you just can't in that scenario. So I think the most important thing is that the community understands the ethos of what you stand for. And that's why with Data Council, there's a couple things. I already mentioned open source, that's super important to us. And we're always looking for new ways to lift up open source and to encourage engineers to submit their open source projects for us to promote them. We prioritize open source talks at our conference. That's just one thing. I think the other thing for Data Council is that we've committed to not be an over-sponsored brand. This can make it hard economically for us to be able to grow and build hire the team that we want to sometimes, but we're very careful about the way we integrate partners and sponsors into our events. And we don't want to be, what we see as some of our competitors being sort of oversaturated and swarming with salespeople. So there's a few like high thing. And I guess the other thing that's super important for us is we're just deeply, deeply committed to deeply technical content. We screen all of our talks, and we're uncompromising in the speakers that we put on stage. And I think all of these things resonate with engineers. Like I'm an engineer, and so I know how engineers think. And I think these three things have differentiated us from a lot of the other conferences and events out there. We realized that there was space for this differentiation. And I think all these things resonate with engineers. And now it makes engineers and data scientists around the world want to raise their hands and help us launch meetups. We were in Singapore last month. We launched our first Data Council conference there, which was amazing. And the whole community came between Australia and India and the whole region, Southeast Asia. They were there. And we left with 3 or 4 new meetups in different cities because people came to the conference, saw what we stood for, saw that they were sitting next to awesome people and awesome engineers. And it wasn't just a bunch of suits at a data conference. And they wanted to go home and take a slice of Data Council back to their city. And so we support them in creating meetups, and we connect them to our community, and we help them find speakers. And it's just been amazing to really see that thrive. And I think, like I said, the main thing is just knowing the core ethos of what you stand for. And even in the crazy times, just being consistent about the way you communicate that to the community, and then letting the community run with it and see what happens. And sometimes it's messy, and sometimes it's awesome. But it's an awesome experiment. And I just think it's incredible that a small company like us can have global reach. And it's only because of the awesome volunteers, community organizers, meetup organizers, track hosts for our conference that we've been able to suck into this orbit. And we just want to make the world a better place for them. And they've been super, super helpful and kind in supporting us. And we couldn't have done it without them. So it's been an awesome experiment. And, we're continuing to push forward with that model.
With so many different participants and the global nature of the community that you're engaging with, there's a lot of opportunity for different surprises to happen. And I'm wondering what have been some of the most interesting or exciting, to paraphrase Bob Ross, happy accidents that you have encountered in your overall engagement with the community?
I guess this wasn't totally unsurprising, but I just love to sort of surround myself with geeks. You know, geeks have always been my people, and even when I stopped writing code actively, I just gravitated towards software engineers, and obviously, which is why I'm sort of I do what I do, and it's what makes me tick. I guess one of the interesting things through running a conference like this is you get to meet such awesome startups, and there's so many incredible startups being started outside of the valley. You know, I lived in New York City for many years, and I lived in San Francisco for many years, and now I spend most of my time in Wyoming. So I'm relatively off the map in one way of thinking. But in the other way, as the center of this conference, we just meet so many awesome engineers and startups all over the globe. And I'm really happy to see such awesome ideas start to spring up from other startup ecosystems. So, I don't believe that all the engineering talent should be focused in Silicon Valley, even though it's easy to go there, learn a ton, really benefit from that, benefit from the community, benefit from the big companies with scale. But ultimately, I think, not everyone is going to live in the Bay Area. I hope they don't, because it's already getting a little messy there. But I just want to see, all of these things sort of democratized and distributed, both in terms of software engineering and then the engineers that start these awesome startups. And so, the ease with which I'm able to meet and see new startups around the globe through the data council community, I think has been a real bright spot in that. And I don't know if it was necessarily a surprise, but maybe it's been a surprise to me at how quickly it's happened.
So, one of the other components to managing communities is the idea of sustainability and the overall approach to governance and management. And I'm wondering, both for the larger community aspect as well as for the conferences and meetup events, how you approach sustainability to ensure that there is some longevity and continuity in the overall growth and interaction with the community.
Yeah, I think the main thing, gets back to another core tenet of sort of the psychographic of a software engineer. Software engineers need to know how things work, and that's sort of at the core of our mentality in building things. We want to know how things work. If we didn't build it ourselves, we prefer to like rip off the covers and understand how it works. And to be honest, part of the way that, for instance, we select talks at our conference, I think this applies to. And we're learning to get better about. I mean, I think as a value, we believe in openness and transparency in our company. I think externally facing, we're getting better about how we actually enable that with the community. But for instance, for our next Data Council conference that's coming up in New York in November, we've published all of our track summaries on GitHub, and we've opened that up to the community where they can contribute ideas, questions, maybe even speakers, themes, sub themes, etc. And I think just the nature that we have the culture to start to plan our events like this in the open, I think brings a lot more transparency. And then I guess the other thing about a community that's just sort of inherent, I think, in a well-run community is the amount of diversity you get. And obviously, we're all aware that software engineering as a discipline is just suffering from a shortage of diversity in certain areas. And I think as we commit to that locally, regionally, globally, there's so many types of different diversity that we get through the event. So I think both of these things are super meaningful in like keeping the momentum of that community moving forward, because we want to continue to grow, and we want to continue to grow by welcoming folks that maybe didn't necessarily previously identify with the data engineering space, into the community, so that they can see what it's like and evaluate if they want to take a run at that in their career. So I think all these things, transparency, openness, diversity, these are all hallmarks of a great community, and these are the engines that keep the community going and moving forward. Sometimes in spite of the resources or lack of resources, that a company like Data Council itself can muster at any one time.
In terms of the conference itself, the tagline that you focused on, and we've talked a little bit about this already, is that they are no fluff, paraphrasing your specific wording, and as a way of juxtaposing them against some of the larger events that are a little bit more business oriented, not calling out any specific names. And I'm wondering what your guidelines are for fulfilling that promise and why you think it is an important distinction. and conversely, what some of the benefits are for those larger organizations and how the two scales of event play off each other to help foster the overall community.
Yeah, well, one thing here is I think comes to the mentality of the engineer, and then the other side of it is the mentality of the sponsor and the partner. And hey, I think engineers are just noble, and like I said, engineers want transparency. They want to know how things work. They don't want to be oversold to. They want to try a product for themselves. There's just all of these sort of things baked into the engineering mindset. And first and foremost, we want to be known as the conference in the community that respects that. Like that's the main thing. Because engineers, like without engineers in our community loving it, getting to know each other, we're not careful about the opportunities and the context that we create for them, they're just going to run in the other direction. And so, like first and foremost, like those are the hallmarks of what we're building from the engineering side. Then on the partnership side, I think companies are not great at understanding how engineers think. Recruiters are not great at talking to engineers. Marketers are not great at talking to engineers. I mean, yes, engineers need jobs, and yes, engineers need new products and tools. But to find companies that actually know how to respect the mental hurdles that engineers have to get through in order to like get interested in your product or get interested in your job, that's a super significant thing. And through my years of working in this space, I've done a lot of coaching and consulting with CTOs, specifically surrounding these two things: recruiting and marketing to engineers. And I think that awesome companies who respect the central place that engineers have and will continue to have in the innovation economy that's coming realize that they have to change their tune in the way they approach these engineers. So our conference platform is a mechanism that we can use to gently sort of steer and even teach some partners how to interact with engineers in a way that doesn't scare them away. And so just broadly speaking, like I mentioned, we're just super careful about how we integrate partners with our event. And we're always as a team trying to come up with better ways to message this and better ways to educate and sort of welcome sponsors, into the special network that we've built. But it's challenging, like not all marketers think alike and not all marketers know how to talk to engineers, but we're committed to creating a new opportunity for them to engage with awesome data scientists and data engineers in a way that's valuable for both of them. And that's a really fun, big challenge. And, we're not as worried about how much as it scales right now as much as we were enhancing the quality of those interactions. And so that's what we're committed to as a brand. And, it's not always easy, but we've learned a lot and we have a lot to learn. And we always sort of touch base with the community after the events and sort of ask the community what they thought and how they interacted with the partners and did they find a new job and how did that happen? And so we're always trying to pour gasoline on what works in that respect and continue to innovate and move forward in that way.
In addition to your work on building these events and growing the meetups and overall network opportunities for people in the engineering space, you have also become involved as an investor, and you've mentioned that you focus on data-oriented businesses. And I'm curious how you ended up getting involved in that overall endeavor and how that fits into your work with Data Council and what your overall personal mission is.
Oh yeah, well, that's definitely one of my side projects. As I mentioned, I want to help 1,000 engineers start companies, and this is just part of what makes me tick. Just helping software engineers through the conference, through advising their startups, through investing, through helping them figure out go to market. I guess a lot of this energy for me came from having started 4 companies myself. And as an engineer who didn't go to B school, but instead opted to start, my first company in New York City in 2003, there weren't a lot of people that had started 3 companies in New York by the time the early, aughts or the late aughts came around. So yeah, I guess I've learned a lot of things the hard way. And I think a lot of engineers are kind of self-taught and they also they tend to learn things the hard way. So I guess a lot of my passion there is, again, sort of meeting engineers where they're at, how they learn. And, to them, like I'm kind of a business guy now. I have experience with starting companies, building products, fundraising, marketing, building sales teams. And, most of those things are not necessarily top of mind for many software engineers that want to start a company. They have a great idea. They're totally capable of engineering it and building a product, but they need help in all the other, softer businessy, salesy stuff, as well as fundraising. So I guess I've just figured, I've discovered this sort of special place I have in the world where I'm able to help them, coach them through a lot of those business challenges. I could never build the infrastructure that they're building or figure out the algorithms or the models that they're building, but I can help them figure out how to pitch it to investors, how to pitch it to customers, how to go to market, how to hire a team that scales. And so I've discovered that I just had, through my ups and downs as an entrepreneur, I've developed a large set of early stage hustle experience. And I'm just super happy to pass that on to other engineers who are also passionate about starting companies. So that's just something I found myself doing anyway, as a mentor for 500 startups or as a mentor for other companies. And one thing led to another. And soon I started to do angel investing. And now I have an AngelList syndicate, which is actually quite interesting because it's backed by a bunch of CTOs and heads of data science and engineers from our community who all co-invest with me. And as I'm able to help companies bring their products to market, startups come to market, oftentimes there'll be an investment opportunity there. And so I'll bring in another network of technical people who add value to that company even more. So I'm just sort of a connector in this community, and the community is doing all kinds of awesome stuff, inside and even sometimes outside of Data Council, which is just a testament to the power of community overall. And, I just happen to be, I'm super grateful that I'm along for the ride, and I get engineers who come to me and trust me for help, and I'm able to connect these dots and help them succeed as well.
In terms of the ways that businesses are structured, I'm wondering what it is about companies that are founded by engineers and led by engineers that makes them stand out, and why you think that it's important that engineers start their own companies, and how that compares to businesses that are founded and run by people who are coming more from the business side, and just your overall experience in terms of the types of focus and levels of success that those two different sort of founding patterns end up playing out.
Yeah, well, you can tell based on what I've been saying that I'm just super bullish on the software engineer. And, does that mean that the software engineer as a persona or a mentality or a skill set, is inherently awesome and has no weaknesses and no problems? Like, hell no, of course not. And I think some of the challenges of being a software engineer and how your mentality fits into the rest of business are well documented. So I think all of us as engineers need to grow and diversify and increase the breadth of our skills. And so that has to happen. But on the other hand, if we believe that innovation is going to continue to sweep the world, and highly technical solutions, perhaps to sometimes non-technical problems, perhaps sometimes to technical problems, are going to continue to emerge, I feel like people who have the understanding of the technical implications and the realities and the architectures and the science of those solutions just have an interesting edge. So I think there's a lot of hope in teaching software engineers how to be great CEOs. And I think that's increasingly happening. I mean, look at Jeff Lawson from Twilio or the guys from Stripe. Even Uber was started by an engineer, right? There was the quiet engineer at Uber, Garrett, sort of quiet in terms of Travis, who was a co-founder of that company. So I think we're seeing engineers not just start the most amazing companies that are changing the world, but they're increasingly in positions of becoming CEOs in those companies. I guess you might even take that one step further. And I'm kind of trying to be an engineer who's also been an operator and a founder, but now I'm stepping up to becoming a VC and being an investor. So I think there's the engineer VC, which is really interesting as well. But I think that's a slightly different conversation. But suffice it to say that engineers are bringing a valid mentality into all of these disciplines. And yes, of course, an engineer has to be taught to think like a CEO and has to learn how to be strategic and has to learn sales and marketing skills. But I think it's just an awesome challenge to be able to layer those skills on top of an engineering discipline that they already have. And I'm not saying this is the only way to start a company or that business people, can't find awesome engineers to partner with them. I mean, honestly, I think an engineer often needs a business co-founder to help get things going. But I'm coming at it from the engineering side and then figuring out like all the other support that the engineer needs to make a successful company. And that's just because I've chosen that particular way, but other people will be coming at it from the business side, and I'm sure that will be fine for them as well.
In terms of the challenges that are often faced for an engineering founder in growing a business and making it viable, what are some of the common points of conflict or misunderstandings or challenges that they encounter? And what are some of the ways that you typically work to help them in establishing the business and setting on a path to success?
Well, I think the biggest thing, that I see is many engineers are just afraid to sell. And unfortunately, you can't have a business if you can't have some sales. And so somehow engineers have to get over that hurdle. And that can be a long process. It's been a long process for me. And I still undersell what we do at Data Council, to be honest, in some ways. And I have people around me to help me do that. And we want to do that, again, in a way that's in line with the community. But I'm constantly trying to figure out how to be essentially a better salesperson. But for me, that means that still sticking to the core of my engineering values, which is honesty, transparency, enthusiasm, value, and really understanding how to articulate the value of what you're bringing in a way that's unabashedly honest and transparent. So I think that's a really big thing for a pure engineer founder. Is it can be difficult to go out there and figure out how to get your first customers, how to start to sell yourself personally. And then the next step is how do you build a sales culture and a process and a team that's in line with your values as a company. And that scares some engineers, because it's just terrifying to think about building a sales org when you can barely accept that your product needs to be sold yourself. But I think that's just that's sort of ground zero for starting a company. And so, I try and be as gentle as possible in sort of guiding engineers through that process. But I guess that's one of the core hiccups that I think engineers have to figure out how to get over by bringing in other people they trust or getting advice, or, you have to approach it sometimes with kid gloves. But teaching engineers how to sell in a way that's true to their values, I think is just a really big elephant in this room that, I constantly run into and try to help engineer founders with.
In terms of the businesses that you evaluate for investing in, what is your strategy for finding the opportunities, and what are the characteristics of a business that you look for when deciding whether or not to invest? And then as a corollary to all of that, why is it that you're focusing primarily on businesses that are focused mainly in the data space, and the types of services that you're looking for that you think will be successful and useful?
Yeah, well, I guess last question first. I think, it's important to have focus as an investor, and not everybody can do everything awesome. I think it's also a strategy to building a new brand and a niche fund in the face of the Sequoias and the Kleiners of the world. I think we might be past the days when a new fund can easily build a brand that's that expansive. So I think this is just kind of typical marketing strategy. I think if you start to focus on a niche and do one niche really well, I think that produces network effects, smaller network effects inside that niche that then grow and grow and grow and develop. So, I mean, I've chosen to focus in my professional life on data science, data engineering, data analytics. That's Data Council. Partly that's because I just believe in the upside of that market. So I think that's just a natural analog to a lot of my investing activity, because I'm knowledgeable about the space, because I have a huge network in the space, because I'm looking and interested in talking to these companies all the time. It's just a natural fit. That's not to say that I'm also passionate about broader developer tools. And as you mentioned earlier, I'm an investor in Clubhouse. I'm interested in security companies. So I think, for me, there are some analogs to just like deeply technical companies, led by technical founders that also fit my thesis. But it's a fairly niche, narrow thesis. Like most of the stuff I do on the investing side is B2B. I meet the companies through my network and through Data Council. I think they're solving, meaningful problems in the B2B space. Another criteria often is they may be supported by some previous open source success, or the company might be built on some current open source project that I feel gives them an unfair advantage when it comes to distribution and getting a community excited about the product. So these are a few of the things that I look for in terms of the investing thesis.
In terms of the overall industry and some of the trends that you're observing in your interaction with engineers and with vetting the different conference presentations and meetup topics, what are some of the trends that you're most excited by? And what are some of the ones that you are either concerned by or some potential issues that you see coming down the road in terms of the overall direction that we are heading as far as challenges that might be lurking around the corner?
Well, I think one big thing there is just data science and ethics, AI fairness, bias in AI and deep learning models, ethics when it comes to targeting customers, what data you keep on people. Like I think all these things are just super interesting business issues. They're policy issues, they're business issues. At one level, they're also technical issues. So there's technical implementation stuff that's required. But I just think raising that discussion is important. And so that's one area that we're focusing on Data Council in the next series of events that we run later this year and next year is elevating that content in front of our community so that it can be a matter of discussion, because I think those are important topics. They're not always seen as the most technical, but I think they're super important in terms of us trying to help the community steer and figure out where the ship is going in the future. So I think that's super interesting. And then I guess on the technical side, I think the data ops world is starting to mature. I think that there's a lot of interesting opportunities there in the same way that the DevOps revolution, revolutionized the way that software was built, tested, deployed, monitored. And companies like Chef and New Relic, came out in perhaps the mid 2000s. I think we're at a similar inflection point with data ops, if you will. And there's more repeatable pipelining process. There's back testing and auditing capabilities that are required for data pipelines that aren't always there. There's monitoring infrastructure that's being built in some cool companies that I've seen recently. So I think data ops and basically just elevating data engineering to the level that software engineering has been at for a while is definitely something that seems to be catching fire. And we also, try and support through the conference as well.
Looking forward, what are some of the goals and plans that you have for the future of the Data Council business and the overall community and events?
Well, I think, as I mentioned, our biggest goal is to build the data and AI talent community worldwide. And I think that we're building a network business. So I guess it's kind of takes me back to when I started Hackle Labs, which was the digital social network. And I thought we were building a digital product. And as I already mentioned, one thing led to another. And now we have Data Council instead. Well, Data Council is, butts and seats at events and community, and it's IRL engineers getting together, but it's still a network. It's not a super fast digital ephemeral network, but it's a network, and it's a super meaningful network. So it's kind of interesting that after all the ups and downs, like I still see ourselves as in the network building business. And I think the cool thing about building a network is once you build a network, there's lots of different value that you can add on it. So I think in terms of there's really big ideas here. There's formalizing education and education offerings. There's consulting services that can be built on top of this network where companies can help each other, or recruiting sort of fits in the same vein. I think there's other things as well. There's a fund, which I mentioned is a side project that I have to help engineers in this community start companies. So I think there's all kinds of interesting things that you can build on top of a network once you've gotten there. And for now, our events are essentially a break-even business that just give us an excuse and the ability to grow this network all around the world globally. But I think, there's a much bigger like phase 2 or phase 3 of this company where we can build really awesome stuff based on this engineering network, a network and a brand that engineers trust that we've laid down in the early part of the building phase. So I'm really excited to see that and develop that strategy and mission going forward.
Are there any other aspects of your work on Data Council or your investment or your overall efforts in the data space that we didn't discuss yet that you'd like to cover before we close out the show?
No, I think we covered a lot of stuff. I hope it was interesting for you and your audience. And I encourage folks to reach out to me and get in touch. If there's engineers out there that want to start companies, If there's engineers that want to participate in our community worldwide, we're always looking for awesome people to help us find and screen talks. We're interested in awesome speakers as well. I'm always interested in talking to deep learning and AI researchers who are out there who might have ideas that they want to bring to market. But yeah, you can reach me at pete@datacouncil.ai, and I'm happy to plug you into our community. And yeah, if I can be helpful to anyone out there, I would just really encourage them to reach out.
And for anyone who does want to follow up with you or keep in touch or follow along with the work that you're doing, I'll have your contact information in the show notes. And as a final question, I'd just like to get your perspective on what you see as being the biggest gap in the tooling or technology that's available for data management today.
Yeah, I think, as I mentioned, I think maybe it comes down to this data ops thing, right? There's really interesting open source projects coming out, like Great Expectations is one. Interesting companies coming out like Elemental, which is built around Dagster, which is an open source project. So I think that this is a really interesting niche sort of tooling area, specifically in the data engineering world, that I think we should all be watching. And then I guess the other sort of category of tooling I'm seeing, it's sort of related. It's also in the monitoring space. It's watching the data in your data warehouse to see if there's anomalies that sort of pop up, because we're pulling together data from so many different hundreds of sources now that I think it's a little bit tricky to watch for data quality and integrity. And so I think there's a new suite of tools that are popping up in that data monitoring space, which are very interesting. So those are a couple of areas that I'm interested in and looking at, especially when it comes to data engineering applications.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time today to share your experiences in building and growing these event series and contributing to the overall data community, as well as your efforts on the investment and business side. So definitely an area that I find valuable, and I've been keeping an eye on your conferences. There's been a lot of great talks that come out of it. So I appreciate all of your work on that front, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, thanks, Tobias. We'll see you at the Data Council conference sometime soon.
Listening. Don't forget to check out our other show, podcast.init, at pythonpodcast.com to learn about the Python language, its community, and the innovative ways it is being used. And visit the site at dataengineeringpodcast.com to subscribe to the show, sign up for the mailing list, and read the show notes. If you've learned something or tried out a project from the show, then tell us about it. Email hosts at dataengineeringpodcast.com with your story. And to help other people find the show, please leave a review on iTunes and tell your friends and coworkers.